Today, Valhalla movement is at the COP in Place to Be with an MP from Denmark, Christian Paul, to get the political perspective on the climate talks. So, Christian, how do you feel about the climate talks so far, now being that it's been about 8 days since it started?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to assess the process, to know where things are going. Even as a politician, you know, I get most of my information from the NGOs, and there are pros and cons, and something is moving and something is not. I think it's difficult to know exactly what is going on.
Is that a traditional method for politicians to get their information from NGOs instead of other sources?
I think for some part of the political world in Denmark, it's very common because the NGOs in Denmark are quite strong, and they work quite professionally, and they have a very broad network. So I often get my information from there.
I find it so interesting, though, to be, I mean, we would expect that government politicians would be the first people, if anybody, would know about what's going on with the talks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people have this idea that even us being here at the Paris Climate Talks, that we have access to everything that's going on and all the discussions, but the reality is it's not the truth, right?
No.
Most of these discussions are going on behind closed doors. We really don't know who's even in these meetings, let alone whether or not there's like lobbyists and stuff, which there surely are. And yet even somebody who's in government right now doesn't necessarily have a grasp on how things are going. You know,
not directly anyway.
Yeah, and that's so interesting to hear that, you know, mostly even, you know, we're rooming with a journalist who's also covering the talks kind of more, you know, very specifically at Le Bourget. And she's like, well, look, I don't really know what's happening. What I know is when somebody comes out of the room, they like tell us a little something. And apparently it's going better than it did in Copenhagen, which is very interesting. But I mean, you know, I want to hear a little bit of your take on the talks in general. Not just here in Paris, but the talks in general have been seen as largely being talks more than action plans, right? And there are always these voluntary deals that are coming out where nobody's really committed to all that much. I mean, we can write a whole bunch of stuff on a piece of paper, but if we're not actually actionably doing it, it's worth nothing, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people want to say that these climate talks sometimes are bullshit. I mean, how do you respond to that? How do you feel about that? I mean,
I think it's all about that. Well, negotiation in itself is very complicated sometimes.
Yep.
But here we have negotiations between hundreds of countries. And even many more organizations, which may be a bunch of countries or professional organizations or NGOs. And there are so many parties around the table here. So it is very complex. And yesterday, for example, I went to a small side event about the ship industry. And how the CO2 emissions from shipping is at a high level, and you may push it to be reduced to a lower level. And then the Danish organization and one of the big shipping companies in the world, which is Danish, kind of together pushed the IMO, the International Marine Organization, to set up goals.
Okay.
And that is one example that, well, everyone can follow that. It was an open session in the blue area for all with the badge. That was an open session, and you could attend it, you could ask questions, and you could get the feeling that here's an organization of industries and a very big company. They want to push. And there's an international organization, IMO. They are reluctant. They don't know really how far they can go, and that is maybe because of China or other big countries that are members being very reluctant. So I have the feeling that it's not just bullshit. It's about some pushing, some drawing, and it's all about that. Negotiations are like that.
Okay, so before we go any further, I would love for you to explain a little bit of your role and your position within the Danish government. I mean, I think, a lot of people have, again, mistrust for government around the world. I think, by all means, from the outside perspective, the Danish are doing a great job, however.
Yeah, thanks.
And I think a lot of people feel that way. But when it comes to like Canada, when it comes to America, we just don't have that same faith in our government. So we would love to hear a little bit more about your position in this government, but also how the Danish government is kind of uniquely structured as well. I mean, it seems like you guys have numerous parties, which is very different than, the two-party system that you have in America, for example. And that leads to a lot more discussion, a lot more, communication, a lot more collaboration versus this kind of competitive environment where it seems like in America, for example, Obama said, I can't do a non-voluntary agreement, I can't do a binding agreement because I can't pass it in the Senate or the House or whatever because of the Republicans. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe address a little bit about how the system works in Denmark.
Yeah. I'm new in politics in Denmark. I'm a member of parliament for a new party that was just created 2 years ago, and we were elected with 9 seats in parliament this summer. So it was a great success.
And is this the first time your party got seats?
Yes, it's the first time the party got seats, and it's the first time. It's the first time 7 out of 9 from our party are in politics.
Wow.
So we are not experienced politicians, any of us.
Wow.
One of us has been there for the previous period, and one has been in the European Parliament some years back.
Okay.
But the rest of us, I come from an organization, from an NGO. Others have been entrepreneurs. Others have been in the healthcare sector. Very different people.
Wow.
So we are all learning a lot. But my impression after this 5 first months in Danish Parliament is that there's a very good cooperation. People really like to talk to each other and find solutions if it's possible. But we went into Parliament as an opposition.
Okay.
So there's a right-wing government now, and they are cutting down on climate and environmental issues, nature issues, things like that. So we have a bit of a fight together with some of the old parties also fighting for better climate and environmental.
And so is the current climate that basically, like, do they have a majority? This current party in power, do they have a majority? So if like you guys band together and say, you know what, even though you want to cut back on the environment, all of the other parties want to come together and say, no, we're going to continue.
That
happening?
Is actually possible if we can get a very small conservative party on our side. but we can do that once in a while. We can't do it all the time.
Yeah, of course.
So it's very much case by case. And it's very much about negotiating, like we do here. We are now 9 parties in the Danish Parliament.
Wow.
And it's from the far most right wing to the far most left wing, and we are somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
So we are among the parties that actually try to work in both directions, being very progressive on the green side, the sustainability side. And trying to lift that area together with social aspects
and you guys are if I'm translating this correctly, you guys are like the alternative party.
Yes.
But that's basically your name, right?
That's our name. We are alternative in many ways, I would say. We don't build on ideology, for example. We build on values. We have selected 6 values. That are common, understandably values. It's courage, it's humor, humility, generosity, transparency, and empathy.
Wow.
These are the 6 values that we build on, and they are on my spine all the time. I work with them. I use them when I'm in doubt. every time I'm in doubt, I kind of lean back and think, okay, pro or con, oh, I need to be transparent, so I must go for the pro here.
So there's a reason why we decided to interview Christian Paul, and that's because of exactly, we saw you here, you were staying at a hostel with other grassroots organizations like us. You got here on a shuttle bus. You're not surrounded by security. You're not wearing a tie either. What does your shirt say?
Oh, it's different.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think you're a great example.
Thanks.
For what I would look for in a representative or in a leader of my nation.
Yeah.
And why don't you talk to us a little bit more about this pledge that your party is making and is drafting for the rest of Europe as well?
Yeah, we were very inspired by the movement of Naomi Klein and the LEAD manifesto that was just presented last week. Mm-hmm. And when we heard about that, we said, oh, we should do that, but on the political level.
Yep.
Because that is possible in Europe. At least in Denmark, but also many other countries in Europe. That is possible to kind of say, can we go together with the common goal of a better world? And the LEAD manifesto was then translated into a European version. We call it the Green Manifesto, a moonshot for Europe. And we wanted to set a tough goal of 1.5%, 1.5 degrees for the climate temperature rise. Yeah, mm-hmm. And we actually negotiated the text with the first 3 other members of the Danish Parliament parties, and then we went to European countries to see if others were interested, and it actually ended up so well that now we have 20 parties from 13 different European countries.
Wow.
Wow.
And they represent 4 million European citizens.
Wow.
So that's a good start.
Yeah,
and this is like, you heard about this manifesto like last week?
Now, the LEAD manifesto, we heard about it in the working of it. So I think we started working with our Green Manifesto some 2 months ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Like, for 2 months,
yeah,
that's saying a lot. I mean, getting 4 million kind of people who are represented by all these parties and different nations is, I mean, it's saying something, right?
Yeah.
Particularly coming from a small, newer kind of political party in the alternative. So that's amazing.
Exactly.
I mean, I think we need more politicians to be in the position where we can trust them.
Yes.
Right? And that's just the general feeling, again, of people not knowing what, like, because I think what ends up happening, and it's a two-headed beast here. There's this mistrust that comes from politics, but I think actually, in my opinion, actually, the biggest mistrust should be placed on the media, right? Yeah. And the agendas of the media, because at the end of the day, as much as the government has power to do and write the laws and do these kinds of things, what we also see is that they have to sometimes address and be distracted by the different things that the media are talking about. Yeah. Right? And whatever the story is that in America, Fox News or MSNBC or whatever it is wants to cover is what kind of you guys need to start addressing at times, even though it's not always the most important issues. And so I find it very interesting to not only consider, what the role of government is, but what the role of the media is. Yeah. And how do you feel the media in Denmark, I guess, is helping and sometimes not supporting and not helping your cause towards getting this message out there? Like, I mean, for example, has anybody in the media covered this moonshot manifesto? Has anybody even considered even bringing this up?
No, not very much. I hope we can lift it further when we get back and after the COP has been settled, or during this week maybe. But I think media are just as different as people. Mm-hmm. We have progressive media in Denmark who really wants to talk details and who wants to hear about all the solutions that we can point at.
This is the media in Europe.
The media in Europe and Denmark especially. I know mostly media in Denmark.
Denmark, okay.
Yeah. But also in Denmark we have, of course, these colorful media who just want to make a story about something crazy, and they are looking for it everywhere. And sometimes it's me.
Do you guys ever feel like taken aback by the distraction that the media might provide sometimes? Like, oh, are you really focusing on this issue right now? Do you ever feel like it's a bit childish?
Well, we try to make fun out of it whenever possible. Yes, and that's one of our values, as I mentioned before, humor.
Yeah, humor.
Yeah. So whenever a paper or a radio station calls me up and says something crazy, then we're in the crazy mood. So what can I say?
I love that you play their game. Like you play their game with them, against them.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think that's how it needs to be played. That's great. It is great that you have humor as one of your values.
Yeah. For example, we have a media called 24/7.
Okay.
And they kind of, last year they realized that there was me being an engineer and another guy on the far right wing also being an engineer. He doesn't believe in climate change and he just believes that we should let the market control everything and then everything will be good.
Okay.
Yeah, and I say, I believe that we have a climate crisis and that we have to seriously handle that and find solutions, both economic and all other means. So they have again recently set us up where it's kind of a funny discussion among two engineers being well educated the same area, the same place, in the same time, more or less, but ending up in two opposite positions. And it's a funny discussion because now we know what each other will say, so I can say, oh no, Carl, please don't talk about this nuclear power again. No. I know you will always go into that, but you know my position. And so it becomes funny and light instead of becoming, oh, I don't want to say anything about that.
Interesting. So yesterday we had the luxury of attending an event held by, I guess, 350.org and some local organizations here in Paris and stuff. And it was all about Exxon New, right? It was this idea that ExxonMobil, and it's not really an idea, it's pretty much, in my opinion, it's definitely fact, that they had climate scientists that were working for Exxon that knew that climate change was happening and was a risk. But they covered it up. They basically said...
since back in the 70s.
Yeah, and since back in 78, basically, they started to really know. And the general consensus is that basically they were merchants of doubt. They were... Essentially, they hired the same people that were merchants of doubt for the tobacco industry, and then said, you know what, like, we can create doubt, and in the media, just like you just explained, we're always going to have two positions. We're always going to have the person who denies and the person who agrees. And here's the reality, though. The vast majority of people are probably on your side of this debate. And yet in the media, that's always a 50-50 split. And so there's this constant, I don't know, I guess there's this constant, I mean, I guess that's fair reporting, right? They're just trying to give angles to both sides. But at the same time, it's not always necessarily fair. And there's giant corporations all around the world, including in Denmark, that essentially lobby the government for their own purposes, for their own needs, and for their own financial gains. And, I mean, I want to know, how do you address that? How do you end up? How do we make sure that giant corporations like Exxon, who made like, what is it, $42 billion in a year? How do we curb their influence on the planet? Because it seems like the more money you have, the more real power you have, and not necessarily our votes and all these things are counting, because that's just not the way it's playing out in the media and in the world.
I agree. And it's about education, I think, and about research, of course, and then it's about looking into the financial system. Because the financial system has got out of control. And in the Alternative Party, we like to talk about these three pillars, but we really like to work with them too.
Sure.
And if you go to the Danish Parliament and look at all the parties all 9 parties, they have the word sustainability in the program.
Of course.
But not many work them equally, and we are trying to do that from the start, from the beginning here. We like to question the neoliberal way of thinking economy, and we want to, for example, introduce a supplement to the GDP way of measuring economy, so that we can have happiness or things like that built into the way of adjusting economy year by year.
How do you...
It's a long process, and we have to pick it up and work with it. And it's very difficult because the inequality in world is accelerating.
Absolutely. The middle class is being crushed.
And it's becoming more and more difficult to handle it. The bigger the difference becomes.
Absolutely.
So how do you respond to someone who, with that said, who says that we can't base our society on values, we have to base it on tangible science and economics? How do you justify that values could perpetuate a fruitful life for everyone on this planet?
Well, because values create meaning to any people, any person. It's very difficult to understand climate change and to understand financial markets and things like that. But every citizen can understand the meaning of generosity or the meaning of empathy. And then it becomes much more, it becomes near to your heart. Politics becomes a more natural thing, because then suddenly you are allowed to talk about things like that in a political context.
Absolutely.
And
bringing
then
words that aren't normally in a political context
Yes.
to the table,
Yes,
which
exactly.
now brings and affects policy in some way.
And it also makes it more sexy. Politics is very unsexy, but if you are allowed to be empathic, and if you're allowed to laugh while doing politics, then people start to think, okay, I like to be there. I'll come next time too. That's great. And they have transparency, so I know what is going on. I can follow when is the next meeting and everything.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of also an explanation of our success, being such a big party in only 2 years from nothing. Wow. I think there's a longing between the citizens in Denmark and the rest of the world, a longing for more meaning into politics. It should be more understandable and more reasonable.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, one of the words that, if I had to add a 7th word, I guess, I would bring is also justice.
Yes.
Right? And I think you bring it up with transparency, right? I mean, to some degree. But that's talking about transparency going forward to some degree. It's not necessarily talking about what's gone on in the past. And, we saw, again, the perception of kind of the Scandinavian-style countries and the Northern European countries being in a position to lead some of the best technologies, the best practices when it comes to a more sustainable world is phenomenal. And one of the words you brought up there is sexy, again. And so those 2 words are near and dear to my heart, because one of the things that we say is, we want to proliferate freedom culture at the Valhalla movement. To empower and encourage all individuals to spread their unique gifts to the world. That's our motto. And
beautiful.
And to me, sustainability is about long-term thinking.
Yes.
Now, here's the thing. How do you make a long-term decision, which is not necessarily a decision I want to make right now every day, because today is today, and I'm going to think about what I'm doing right now to some degree. So we have to make that sexy. And one of the areas, however, that I can say is very sexy to people right now is actually justice.
Yes.
And we saw this play out in Iceland, where in Iceland what they did is, after the financial crisis, all their banks kind of collapsed, right? And they had this huge problem. The middle class had been destroyed, basically. And what Iceland did is that they jailed the bankers. What Iceland did is that they basically sold one of the biggest banks and then gave and distributed all that wealth to all its people. What they did is they took on a system that is completely, like, I just couldn't believe it actually happened, and it was actually very refreshing. So, I mean, what role do you see in terms of justice partaking in some of the actions that are being taken by corporations today, but also possibly in the past?
I think justice in Denmark is working to some extent. It's not that far from justice. I think we are known as one of the most equal countries in the world. The case of Iceland is great to see that people are actually jailed for that. We see that in Denmark once in a while too, but there's a big discussion about the bank situation at the moment, because we made some bank packages, we call them, where the state gave guarantees for the banks in the financial crisis so they could continue. And people have been talking a lot about that. On the other hand, they were guarantees, and they were tights put on the banks as part of the solution. So I think we kind of, well, Danish may be known for the small adjustments to the development, so it doesn't kick off the old solutions and bring in new like that, but we do it slowly and thoroughly over time.
Yeah.
But that's maybe because we have gone so far in the democracy that we have. It's I'm quite proud about living in Denmark, because democracy works fairly well, I would say.
It seems to.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely seems to. And I mean, I think
when you have 9 parties in parliament, some people would say it's very disordered, chaotic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I would say that is precisely what makes it democratic.
Yes. I wouldn't like having a two-party system, because then everything is about either or. You can either be for or against. You can be, and life is not like that. Life is much more complicated and much more diverse.
Well, and how I feel about it is it's 2 wings of the same bird,
oh,
right? You got the left wing and the right wing.
That's even worse.
It is. As much as we want to see it otherwise, it's really the same kind of system where it's become as opposed to a democracy, it's become a corporatocracy.
Yeah.
It's become corporations who buy enough influence to lobby the different bills that come in, whether it be the Monsantos or the Exxons or whatever it is. And what's interesting, however, is that all these countries, all these nations partake in some of these kind of larger organizations like the UN or whatever it is that have international courts.
Yeah.
And any one country is kind of able to summon another country or another company out there to kind of go to trial on some of these crimes against humanity, essentially.
Yeah.
And yesterday, we witnessed this Exxon versus the people. It's a crime against humanity as a whole, right? If they knew about climate change, it's not about a crime where they did it in, I don't know, in Iraq, or they did it in other places where they have their oil installations. No. But it's also a crime against the entire planet, right?
Yeah.
And it would be interesting to consider that even a country like Denmark could, to some degree, bring somebody like Exxon to one of these kind of trials, one of these situations. I mean, do you think that's possible? Like, do you think, I'm not saying you need to do it, I'm just trying to say that, is that possible? Is that something that, smaller countries, even though they don't have the biggest influence in the world in terms of, geopolitics, might still be able to have the influence of bringing some level of justice to a corporation in one of these international courts?
I think so. We could do that in Denmark, because I believe the justice system in Denmark works quite well. So if there is a paragraph that has been broken, if they've broken a paragraph, of course you can bring them to trial.
Yep.
An example is Uber. When Uber came to Denmark, the Danish state put up a case immediately because we have a paragraph saying that if you earn money from driving people around, then you should be a taxi driver, having a license, having a special built car with safety, have this and that. And Uber people don't have, so there's an ongoing case. And I think that's that's a small example, but it's an example.
Well, it's a small example, but it's also a telling example in the sense that, you know, these kind of disruptive technologies are going to continue to partake. You know, self-driving trucks and cars are going to be a reality at some point, whether we want to or not. I mean, I think people will always be able to drive a car, and I say always, but always for now. The reality is that there's going to be many jobs lost to technological unemployment.
Exactly.
Right?
I don't think people will allow to drive cars.
You don't think people will be allowed to drive cars?
No. When a self-driving car is introduced on a regular basis,
they're safer than drivers.
And then you will have maybe a 5 years transition, and then it will be not allowed to drive your car anymore because too dangerous.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I think as long as a generation exists that they were able to drive cars, we'll always have that option. To some degree.
Maybe.
I think it will take maybe a little bit of time, but I agree with you that the average person will start using a self-driving car. But my point here is that technological unemployment, the unemployment and the disruption that technology can bring to the world, acts way faster than governments do. Right? Like a new technology springs up way quicker than the government can be able to deal with the laws and the different changes in that story. I mean, to me, it's a losing battle. Fighting Uber right now might win for the moment, but then you've got Airbnb that's wrecking the hotel industry. You've got this that's going to wreck that. And there's going to be constantly a new disruptive technology. Do you think we should lean towards some way of actually adopting these disruptive technologies sometimes in a good way? Because I mean, like, I guess what's your take on technological unemployment? Because this is going to affect millions of people around the world. It's, you know, some people say, but even by 2020 we will start losing millions and millions of jobs. By 2030, it's possible that even between 20 and 45% of all jobs will be lost on the planet. That is incredible. This is 15 years away here.
Terrible.
So,
yes.
How do you address that?
We have a suggestion that we used also before we came into the parliament of lowering the working hours. From today we have an official working hours of 37 hours a week in Denmark, and we should lower that to 30 hours a week over a 10-year period of time.
Wow.
And that's because robots are coming.
Yes.
So instead of getting rid of some jobs and push these people out in unemployment, and then the rest of us working like hell, getting sick out of that, we should
redistribute the hours.
Distribute
I always
the
thought
hours.
why people don't do that. Instead of making 5 people lose their job in a company, why don't you keep those 5 people and just lower the hourly
and the efficiency
quantity
of working and the happiness in working is much higher.
Yeah, and then people have more time to take that money and go and spend it, if anything, right?
Also
and that makes the economy run. I mean,
well, happier people run an economy better. Happier people are more effective at their jobs.
Well, they have a more positive outlook, and therefore they spend more money.
Exactly.
And the economy runs on people's emotions. As much as, no matter how much policy we make, people's emotions affect the economy and they affect the markets. So.
And more time to the family, which means more time to the kids.
Yes.
The kids being better in school,
education, and less time
and so on.
Hiring nannies or whatever it is, daycares or whatever it is. I mean, look, I think it's a great idea. And in fact, I would go a little bit further, and I would love to hear your thoughts on basic income. Because this is a topic that is coming up more and more and more.
It is.
To be honest, I think it's the only solution towards technological unemployment long term. So doesn't have to be right now, although I would love to see it. It'd be interesting to see where basic income and the idea of saying, hey, look, if you're a member of our society, here's the basic income you get. And I think Switzerland was championing some of this, and they were moving forward on some of this. I don't know how it's going necessarily, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that just in general. Like, what
we have another. Go there? We have a suggestion in our program that we say, instead of when people get fired from a job, they and if they don't have education and a what's it called, a society for professional society membership.
Yep.
Then
Like a union, basically.
Yeah, union. Then they end up in kind of a low rate that they can have for a few months or I don't remember, maybe up to 2 years at the moment. I'm not sure about that.
Sure.
And but to get that, you will have to deliver documentation that you're looking for job and you are taking courses and you do this and that. We have a suggestion that when people get in that situation, they should just be set free. You give them the same amount of money that they get today, but you let them just take care of themselves. And if they want help with anything, you help them with that instead.
Wow.
So the price is the same. Actually, maybe it's even cheaper because you don't have all these people to control.
You have less administration to receive the documents.
Exactly. Yeah, less administration, and you pay the same amount of money to these people, so it gives sense to me. But it's very difficult for the common citizen to grab that feeling of injustice.
Yeah.
Because I work and I have to work to get my money, so why don't they have to work to get their money?
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. But I think so. Here's the thing: in current positions, right? There's only a small percentage of people who are unemployed to some degree.
Yeah.
I mean, small. It's relative. It moves. I think in technological unemployment, it's going to be vast. It's going to be huge.
Sure.
You could see whole industries go down
Yeah.
in the matter of a couple of years, realistically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the taxi industry is feeling it when it comes to Uber, and Uber was a word that I had never heard of like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Let's be real. There's a certain amount of acceleration that can destroy entire, dinosaur-style industries. Big employers. And people think that there's lots of jobs in like, software and developers and, kind of new age engineers.
Yeah.
There are, and there will be more. Yeah. What I can tell you though is that the biggest employers in the world are actually still, in some of the service industries, some of the transportation industries, some of the things that, we're going to eventually possibly have drones delivering, and like Amazon, right? Amazon comes out, they have a new service where in some areas you can have same day delivery. Now that's not even with the drone, but now you're going to have like 30-minute delivery with drones possibly.
Oh my God.
That's incredible. Yes. I mean, there's a part of that that's scary. There's a part of that that's like, wow, there's going to be drones everywhere.
Yeah.
There's a part of that that's beautiful. That says like, wow, we've gotten to the point of technology where we can bring an element, something that somebody needs, to them immediately.
Yes.
But it's also going to create more and more people, instead of going to shopping malls, now just ordering things online.
Yeah.
Now, what does that create for all the janitors who work at the malls? What does that create for all the people who work in the stores? What does that create for local economies compared to more global economies that are run online? I mean, there's a problem here that's going to happen that we need to address, and I think
no jobs will ever be the same in 10 or 15 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years ago, YouTube basically barely existed.
Yeah.
Facebook was not really a thing.
No.
And the iPhone basically almost didn't exist either. So it's like, I mean, if you think about the world without an iPhone, you know what I mean?
Like, the wealth already exists, right? The wealth is there. It doesn't change. Whether it goes in the hands of 1,000 people or 10 people, we have to realize that there is enough wealth on this planet to allow everyone to live a very harmonious life, to live a very comfortable life.
Yeah.
Now, I think the issue as we move forward is going to be, how do we share all these resources?
Exactly.
How do we stop people from hoarding? Because, I mean, technically speaking, there is no human birthright to hoarding onto $10 million.
No.
Because that $10 million came from people who cultivated it, who went to mine the raw materials, who they got those things. And so it's like, I think it's our responsibility and the responsibility of our leaders to say, guys, I'm sorry, but that $10 million you're sitting on or whatever, it has to be redistributed because...
Yeah. And beyond even $10 million, that's a level that's probably in the 1%, let's say.
Yeah.
But in the 0.1%, right? In the highest echelons, there's people with billions of dollars of assets that are essentially hoarding a very human technology, an idea and concept, but it is enslaving to some degree everyone else.
Yeah, we would like actually to put a higher tax on inheritance and on land and property, because these are passive values.
Yeah.
and they don't necessarily generate new development.
Yeah.
And then we will lower the tax from the bottom, because that makes people more entreprenant, more they want to take a chance easily.
Yeah.
I think
there's a much more of an entrepreneurial spirit that grows out of that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the last questions we'll have is, okay, so on that same vein, and on the vein of justice and all these things again, what ends up happening is that there's obviously lots of government promises. We're going to tax the rich, help the middle class. I mean, I think that's literally the script for every single politician on the planet to some degree. Not all of them. Like left-wing politicians, left or middle, let's say. What happens though, however, is that even if we raise the taxes, people like Mark Zuckerberg this week, created a huge foundation. Everyone's like, oh, he's giving 99% of his wealth to charity, and it's like, yes, a charity that he and his family control. That is for tax purposes, so that when he dies, he doesn't have to pay these giant corporate inheritance taxes and kind of will taxes, right? So, I mean, and then you hear about offshore banking and the Swiss, everyone moves their money to Swiss banks. I mean, even if you do one thing in one area of the world, there's always these tax loopholes that play out. I mean, this is a huge question, and I know that.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do we address the fact that it seems like no matter what we do, there is always this ability for them to just have another chess piece, another domino, another way of kind of going about it?
Certainly is no easy solution to that.
Yeah.
No. But in Denmark, we have been known for having a high level of what's it called? Our budget, state budget.
Yep.
We normally have been giving up to 1% for development, and we are now cutting down till 7%, which is the I think it's a goal of OECD or some UN or maybe that every country should end up there.
Okay.
And I like the way of distributing money like that as a state, as a government.
So this is distributing money from the bottom up.
Yeah, and distributing with a kind of with some principles, having professionals to evaluate which country and how do we use the money best at this point of time.
Yeah.
The other way would be like Zuckerberg or like putting up big shows and saying, now we've seen some poor people drowning there.
Yeah.
Let's see how much people want to give, and it's just like I think it's great. You make these big shows and people are in
well, it's almost like cause marketing, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And what is it? A shock doctrine, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
A bit.
It's a shock doctrine. So it's a total shock doctrine that says, oh, some big problem went on, right? We see this kid laying in the sand, Syrian refugee, and then all of a sudden, Syrian refugees, which has been a problem for quite some time, is now all of a sudden it's the thing. It's like the thing to talk about, and they use that to create storylines that say, oh, we've created a fund and we're taking care of these people.
And also you don't get the feedback of the system when you do it like that. Then just here's a bunch of money we collected last Saturday. Now you can do what you want, and then next
that's the important,
situation.
the crucial element that needs to be highlighted is where is the feedback, where is the follow-up?
Yes, the follow-up is so important for areas like that. And you can do that if you have a budget, a fixed budget every year from the law of finance. Where you can say, okay, we know that next year we have this money, next year we have this money. So we can plan, okay, this country is on its way up, so maybe we should put focus somewhere else on the school system or hospitals. This country needs still 5, 6, 7 years of basic help. And we can plan that, and we can get the feedback, and we can say, oh, they're fast. So maybe it's only 4 years, and then we can shift into building schools and hospitals there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great if the whole world did that. But I understand why it's not like that. And again, it's about it's very difficult for an average citizen to understand, am I doing right for my money? I'm just paying my tax, and what does that money go to? If I have a look Saturday night on the TV channel and there's a big show and that's a pity. I give him 100 kroner. It's a good feeling, and then it's done, and you have this good feeling. So we need to invent a way that we can do that, but in a more thorough way, year by year, to collect that kind of money in a more sensible or more meaningful way for people.
I think the other thing is that, like, and this, you know, maybe we'll end with this, is the involvement of people.
Yeah.
Right? Because you just mentioned it. Like,
yeah.
they give something, they feel good for a couple of minutes or a day or two, whatever, and then all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah.
And what really is happening is that people are disenfranchised with government because they themselves are disenfranchised with society.
Yeah.
They're disenfranchised with being involved.
Exactly.
It's this kind of, somebody else's job.
Yeah.
Right? Throw a piece of paper or something on the street, it's somebody else's job to pick it up.
Yeah.
It's somebody else's job to worry about climate change. It's somebody else's job to worry about the Syrian refugees. It's somebody else's job to do everything.
Exactly.
Well, eventually, at what point does it become our job?
Yeah.
At what point does our education system not only become the role of somebody like you who's in the government, but also our job, everyday people? Because if we're not doing it, if we're not stepping up as everyday citizens, and if all we're going to do is sit back and complain, then I don't think we really also have the right to say that the system is corrupt, that the system is total bullshit in all sense of the word, and that, you know, we could be too small. I would love to end with a little bit of a wisdom that Lawrence actually shared on our Facebook, which is, you know, never think that you are too small to make a difference. Right?
Yeah,
Never think you're too small to make a difference, because if you've ever slept in a bed and there was a mosquito around, that mosquito can wreak some serious havoc. And this is a quote that was it the Dalai Lama? Yeah, the Dalai Lama mentioned, which is so true. Yeah. So I mean, I think
I'm just gonna take a moment though, because we mentioned, you know, about media not talking about the relevant and important aspects of the global climate talks. So here I have the moonshot for Europe, which is the the 2-page I guess you can say commitment that we're going to pass around. And I mean, you know, Valhalla to an extent is a community of about 15 to 20 people, and I think these are 3 pledges, or would you say they're commandments? So how would you describe those?
The first are kind of a framework. It's more like the next ones on page 2.
They're on the page 2. They're all at the bottom.
Okay. These are the ones that are more like actions.
Actions, okay.
Yeah.
So number 1, how do we produce and consume goods within the boundaries of our planet's natural systems?
Yeah.
So this is something that I think we can think about as we develop Valhalla further. Number 2, how do we cultivate and distribute the fundamental means necessary to achieve a good life for all humans as well as all other species? That's doable, right, Mark?
Yeah.
Totally doable. We can do that. Okay. Number 3, how do we implement the systems of governance and finance which can pave the way for this coming sustainable era?
Yeah.
Also doable. So I pledge, I think Mark pledges too, to keep these questions in mind with every step that we move further in developing a sustainable community.
Great. Yeah.
And I think you guys should check this out, a moonshot for Europe.
We'll put a link in the description, and I want to say thank you very much for taking the time and being that small person making a difference.
Thank you.
And being a part of that.
Thank you for being
very much
part
appreciated.
of your program.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.